And that's why I believe in you, because that is the greatest purpose. It's to love. Honest. It sounds corny, whatever you want to say. I don't care. I love people because there is freedom and power in loving people.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality, and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I am thrilled to have Cory Allen here with me on the show. Cory is truly a man after my own heart who is intent on exploring the ultimate nature of reality. And as it says in the description of his own stellar podcast, The Astral Hustle, like myself, Cory is just trying to figure out what the heck's the deal with being a vibration of consciousness suspended in a meat spacesuit. Hey, Cory, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, man. Thank you so much. Really stoked to be on.
Yeah, likewise. I've been looking forward to this, ever since we scheduled it a while back. And when I was turned on to your show originally, I was like, this is definitely a man after my own heart. I started kind of perusing your different, podcast and interviews. And I noticed some people like Mitch Schultz, who I've had on the show. And so, yeah, definitely we'll have a lot good to talk about, I'm sure. But I would like to start out the same way I always start out. You're in an elevator. You've got 10 floors to answer. The guy next to you looks over and says, "What's your passion?" What do you say?
Just figuring out how much deeper and further I can understand what it means to exist as a human being.
Figure out this meat spacesuit thing, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly.
The question of what are we? Why are we? And how can we become more of what we are is what's interesting.
That is the question. And it's one of those things I have to always really check myself. And it comes up in conversation a lot with people who are on this sort of path of realization, I guess you would say. And it's like, we're going somewhere. We're becoming more. We're seeing more individually as, as society, as a culture. And I think it's just so important to understand that the journey is the goal as well. And it's so easy, especially for individuals like us, how do we understand more? How do we get further? And you do, sometimes you have to be really careful not to do that at the expense of, where I'm at is really nice. Let's stop and smell the roses, as they say, right?
Yeah, totally. I look at it as just a constant unfolding, Yeah. It's an allowing and an unfolding. And that way you don't get wrapped up in your monkey mind, trying to overly falling into the trap of over intellectualization can be had by allowing deeper truths of the human experience to be revealed to you, as opposed to trying to force them. Because whenever you're tending to, if you're digging at it as opposed to allowing the realizations to come, then in the construction and excavation of those questions and those answers, you're using the process oriented aspect of your ego to build those answers. I described the subjective perception of our reality as it's sort of like, obviously we have this nervous system that's taking a reading of the universe outside of our skin and abstracting a subjective singular viewpoint of an objective universe. And that process is not only experiencing one frequency of the universe, a unique frequency, which has its beauty, which is why all of us as humans are interesting and all have a different flavor, of personality and life, etc. But it also is sort of like someone that works in an office and needs to show the boss that they're getting work done, even if there's not a lot of work to be done. So your brain will will calculate and fill in the gaps and kind of create shit along the way. And so that's something that definitely happens if you're pressing and trying to find these answers with fury, is that your ego will kind of fill in the gaps, and you'll create, kind of get on some tangential thoughts for sure. And then since your ego is attached to those thoughts, you identify with them as being personal and have a hard time letting go of them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Are you familiar with the guy, Sevan Bomar, by chance?
No.
Oh, you should check out Sevan. Actually, it just kind of hits me. I have this thing, right, where lately it seems like when I meet people, and as we sort of, speaking of this unfolding of understanding, one of the things is happening a lot for me, Cory, is when I talk to people or meet people where I'll instantly start making these connections with them to other individuals. Like it'll happen to me. Like, for example, I met a girl last week, and it was like an overwhelming flood of this other girl that I know, who I hadn't seen in a year or so. It's like, oh, wow. Like these two are connected. They're like hatched from the same egg, so to speak, the same cosmic egg. And that seems to happen to me more and more. And so I'll connect with someone, and it doesn't always happen, but it's all of a sudden I'll start getting feeling this other person. And as you're talking, it's just like Sevan Bomar. And what do you know? He has a podcast called Astral Quest. So, and this guy is a trip, and instantly as you're talking, and this is the first time you and I have talked, I'm like, Sevan Bomar, like I just feel that same sort of energy, and you will definitely dig him. You should definitely connect with him and his show, and you guys, I'm sure you'll end up talking to each other.
Now I have to go find that guy and kill him.
Yeah, right. Well, of course. Yeah. He's stealing your thunder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite the wizard. So he's quite the sorcerer, as I would say. He's definitely channeling some source energy. So yeah, that should be an interesting battle.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll check him out for sure, man.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. You're located. Your hub is Austin, Texas. Seems to be sort of a hot spot of consciousness to some degree as well. So tell me a little bit about your background, how you ended up there, how you ended up on this path doing the show.
Well, I'm from Texas. I'm from Austin, and my background is music and philosophy. I got into music very, very young, and also philosophy, Eastern, Western, both sides of the coin. Into meditation as well whenever I was, in my early teen years. And really, at a young age, being obsessed with music to almost a kind of manic degree, and also with consciousness, those things have woven together over time. They always were connected in some regard. And I've always had a sense of there was something more and something deeper that I was feeling or wanted to feel more of about reality. And as I began to kind of, as I mentioned, digest the Western and Eastern canons of philosophy and go inward, I realized the most interesting thing to me was the thing that was broadcasting that signal, which was my own consciousness. So from there, I got very interested in neurology, psychology, semantics, and wove all that in with esoteric thought systems as well. So over time, I became a professional music engineer and composer, and I actually intentionally waited. As I mentioned, I always had an insatiable drive to find, just for personal reasons, out of pure internal curiosity and desire to know more about the human experience, and that was always going. I intentionally waited until I felt like I was in the place I wanted to be in internally before I started deploying a public profile and version of what that is and who I am, because I wanted to make sure that, as Bukowski said, the blondes and the men with the movie camera showed up too late. He didn't care anymore because he was over it, and so I was waiting until I was over it. I was over myself, and my ego was in a place where I had peeled its fingers off the joystick enough to feel comfortable putting something out into the world. And ultimately, my friend Aubrey Marcus, I was on his podcast, I don't know, a dozen times or whatever, and I had so many people from his listener group emailing me and sending me messages all the time, being like, "Dude, you've got to start a podcast." So
your turn, man.
So after a couple of years, I decided I was like, okay, I felt ready and moved into doing the Astral Hustle.
Beautiful. And you launched that show, a year ago or so?
Yeah, about a year ago. Yeah.
That's pretty close to when I launched Positive Head a little over a year ago. Spring was a year. So,
and the cool thing about it is also natural in that, my friends we always had these conversations all the time, as you mentioned, like Mitch, Aubrey, Hamilton Souther, Daniele Bellelli, all these people that have been on my podcast, they're just friends, and we would have these conversations, and at some point, as it was sort of percolating, I thought, hey, this is just a good thing to share with the world and share these interesting conversations. And I like having my friends on that have no public profile or persona whatsoever, because honestly, those are some of the best conversations. We just when we talk on the phone, we're just having these conversations, and we'll laugh a lot of time and say, "Hey, this would have been a great podcast."
Yeah.
So I try and.
It's funny because I think of that all the time now. If I have a good conversation, like I had a good conversation that wasn't being recorded last night, and I was thinking the same thing. This person is so epic. I should be recording this, and it's funny how that works. And you mentioned just the people who don't have a public persona. I've said that before. I've been really blessed to have some amazing people on the show, that Oprah's interviewed a couple people, and, some pretty high profile people. And some of those have been really, really great. I mean, most all of them have been good, but some of my favorite conversations have been with people that don't have a big public, like Sevan Bomar, for example. He's the only person I was like, dude, we got a second podcast. Like, let's do this again. I've got so many more things to talk to you about. So, and he has a little bit of a public profile, but, it's not like Eben Alexander, who's like, this big best-selling author, or, some of the other folks that I've had on. So, yeah, I fully agree. Sometimes I like bringing on my friends who have hardly any public profile. And some of them are just so brilliant and have so much going on internally. And they've kind of, like you were talking about, maybe they haven't sort of put that together and made a step out into a public arena. Maybe they never will. I mean, obviously that's not for everyone.
But yeah, exactly, man.
It doesn't in any way like minimize what they are and what they have to offer. So bringing that, it's almost like bringing that gem, that no one's going to hear otherwise, to give them that, give people access, right?
Right. Yeah. That's actually my main interest in all of this stuff and in life is truth and genuine honesty about all of this stuff. So people who don't have public profiles, often you'll find have that authenticity more than people who do, because they're not thinking. There's not an aspect of the brain thinking in this self-aware way about, okay, how is this going to go out into the world? How will this be seen? They're just being themselves. And those are the people that I surround myself with, and so it's great to have people that no one, they have zero profile and they don't have any desire to have one. And I actually think that that's a good thing. I know some of the baddest motherfuckers on the planet that, no one knows and they don't want to be known. And that's why they're as amazing as they are. And fortunately I can kind of talk some of them to getting on my podcast, and I take great joy in being able to share those people with the world. And people, the listeners of them are like, man, that guy is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, he's just chilling in Los Angeles, living his life, man.
Yeah. That's my secret stash.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I totally feel you on that. I've said it multiple times, and it makes it fun too to not have like sort of that pressure of I've got to have this, this big notable guest, or else it somehow reflects poorly on myself. And it's like I'm like the opposite direction. Like at this point, it's like, where can I find those gems that no one knows? Yeah,
that's a flawed way of thinking.
It really is. But so you've been at this about a year or so. You obviously have some interesting guests. You delve down some interesting rabbit holes. What are some of your favorite shows that you've had? What are the topics? What did you guys talk about?
Man, I do dig them all. It's kind of that thing is all the conversations I've had, I've enjoyed, and I knew that they would be great conversations just because they're great people. Ones that stick out. My friend Brian Ramish is one of those people that doesn't have a public profile, but has just been a great friend of mine for 15 years, and we've just talked about this stuff all over that time, and kind of grown together, and it was a real treat to be able to share him with everyone. And Hamilton, me and Hamilton's, he's a shaman that started the Blue Morpho Ayahuasca Center. He's also a great friend, and we had a good one. And really, I like the conversations where I can press the gas pedal without any worry of things getting too far out or too stretched out, because that's really what I enjoy ultimately, is like, how far out and stretched out can I get my thinking, and and so the ones where I feel, I don't know if you feel this, but whenever I tend to start reaching the horizon of my mind, I'll start feeling a little stoned, and I think it's your the modular nature of your perception becoming more multidimensional, like in real time,
beautiful.
So of course he's great. They're all great. I dropped a one this week with Michael Phillip, who runs the Third Eye podcast, and that was a great one. People have been really enjoying that one. So I'd say just check
I don't think I'm
out.
familiar with it.
Oh, really? Yeah, he's killer, man. I highly recommend checking him and his podcast out. He has definitely, given the name Third Eye Drops, he definitely revolves around a lot of the psychedelic culture and things like that, but in the way that I believe it should be done, not in some oopy goopy sort of masturbatory way.
Realizing it's a very it's something to be taken very serious on one hand, right? I mean, it is a medicine that if I had a nickel for every time, I was talking. I just did a interview with a guy, Mike Bledsoe, who does a fitness podcast, which is a little out of the realm of what I normally do, but he has had his own sort of spiritual awakening in the recent years. And what's his story? It's like, oh well, did mushrooms one time, and next thing I know, it's like my whole perspective has shifted from that one experience. And it seems like mushroom seems to play that role a lot for people, at least people that I come across, where it's like that was sort of the catalyst for them that led to a shift in perspective that they never sort of recovered from in a good way. So, I think it is super important for people to understand. It is, when you're talking about taking something, whether, mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca, whatever, and it's like, someone takes it and they're going to be shifted in a permanent way. That's like certainly not something to be taken lightly, right? Even though it's typically a good shift, it's still like you're not going to come back from, you're going to be different than you once were.
Perhaps, yeah. I don't really like the term like medicine, and I know people use that a lot because to me, I think medicine semantically insinuates that there's a finality to it. Like it's a cure. Where it's like if you have a cold and you or an illness or of a flu and you take some antibiotics, that's a medicine by definition, and that there is a stopping point for the ailment. I feel like psychedelics are just tools. And, there are wrenches that you can use to tighten or loosen the hinges of various aspects of the self if used, correctly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I started experimenting, with those whenever I was very young, and I do probably, early teen years.
Oh, wow.
And, I think all of that plus reading, philosophy in neuroscience and all these things together definitely had an impact. But I get people that hit me up frequently asking me my perspective on those things. And should I do ayahuasca? I was on one of my appearances on Aubrey's podcast. I told my ayahuasca story after him and I went to the Amazon. And it kind of became, it sent some shockwaves to the community, and that, the amount of people that hit me up afterwards were one saying, I want to have your experience, and should I do it? Should I do it? And it's like, well, if you're
putting a lot on me to ask me for the answer to what you should do.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people no. And then if they do it anyways, then the answer was yes, then they should have done it. You know what I mean?
Right. The lawyer's answer.
Right. And it's like, you don't want to have my experience. You want to have your experience. That's the whole point.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So you have you been down to the Amazon one time, multiple times? Like, is ayahuasca something that you've, experimented with often?
I only went one time, and that I felt like that was all that was needed. I mean, I did 5 ceremonies in the time I was there, but I only, I felt good after one.
Well, it sounds like you had an epic experience, from what you were just saying, people reaching out wanting to have your experience. You want to share a little of what it was like for you?
Sure. Basically, I've been studied meditation for over 15 years, and I felt in a great place intellectually and internally, and prepared for what I could receive. And I believe in, and talking to Don Howard, who's a maestro where Aubrey and I went, one of the things he said is you will receive what you're prepared to receive, in that work. And so whenever I went down there, I was looking for confirmations in some way, because my, astral vision and awareness of myself and the universe, I felt was at a place that I felt like I'd gotten through a membrane, and I was curious what confirmation I could be shown about that. And boy, I got that confirmation, the first, the first night. And I mean, it would, I could spend hours talking about the details of the experiences, but essentially, it was extraordinarily powerful. I was really able to have my sort of mainframe fried a bit and get out of myself in a lot of ways, which I had not been able to before. It's helped me redefine parts of my self, the way that I interact with other people, with my ego, and the way I see things in the larger picture of the entire system and ecosystem of the cosmos. And, you know, I actually had a funny, sidebar to that is that I was a vegetarian for 7 years before that. And after my ceremonies, I started eating meat again. You know?
Oh, wow. That's interesting. That's like the opposite of one of my friends.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, it was a very powerful experience. You know, in the after effects, that's one of the things that people don't talk about often. And, you know, as I said, you know, you receive what you're ready to receive. And I had a peak, you know, experience, judging from my own judgment and from people who are experienced around me, friends that have, that were there. Oh, you know, Mitch was there as well. And Amber Lyon was there, you know, so a lot of the folks that are involved in that. So you know, I had a peak experience, and I think that the integration matches the dynamic of your experience. And so my integration was, you know, a 6-month long process, maybe longer.
Wow.
I kind of have described it before as it's like a Jenga game underwater, and the pieces are all coming up and floating to the surface, you know, simultaneously in slow motion. And you're dealing with these weird aspects of things about your consciousness where, you know, we have these levels of awareness about how we perceive the world, what's floating around our subconscious, an intuitive feeling as to what we've been kind of denying in a way, but we're also aware of. There's this weird space between subconscious and consciousness where we have these, you know, our intellectual, our gear-based mind, our math mind has a real strong grip on and being able to shroud what our heart mind knows. And, you know, most people go through life feeling and following their intuition, kind of inadvertently, but then processing that intuition of the heart mind through the math mind, because they believe that the you know, transmutation of their intuition through their intellectual mind will make their presentation towards the cosmos and other people more digestible. And that's often where authenticity becomes further separated, you know, is in that process. And so, you know, there's this space on the path from the heart mind to the math mind where things, I think, pull over to the side of the road. And we go through life experiencing these things and these truths about ourselves, about the world, and about our decision making, which we intuitively feel one way and sort of get in this gridlock between the two spaces. And even though we know them, we can't define and change them. And I feel like for me, there was a lot of those things became aware. They all floated to the surface after that. And I was forced to deal with all of those cars that had pulling over on the side of the road, you know?
Right.
And it was very hard, very, very hard, very humbling.
Yeah.
And, you know, another big aspect of that work, and also work with any, you know, psychedelic. And I've been involuntarily involved with the psychedelic conversation on a global level, because of, you know, experiences I've shared or things I've talked about. I've been pulled into talking about it, you know, a lot, kind of against my will, but,
it keeps coming up.
It does indeed. Yeah, it does indeed. So, you know, there's this, you know, it's very humbling, you know, in those experiences, what happens is that there is especially with ayahuasca or something like that, there's a swell of the ego, you know, momentarily, but because people are looking for an acceptance of self, and one of the things that people often instruct and talk about is say, hey, you know, self-love, you've got to learn to love yourself, which is true. In that process of waking up that part of ourselves that can love ourselves, you know, we're using very slippery symbolic terms here, love, you know, to to apply that to the self is like, and you know, I don't like the word spirituality. You know, I don't like the word God. Any of those words I feel like are so strapped with semantic baggage that we don't even know what we're talking about, other than the relation of our own, you know, internal meaning with those things. So people, I feel like in my observation, mistake self-love with self-adornment, and in that feeling, trying to open up those channels through these processes of psychedelics or what have you, people's egos tend to swell because it's, oh, I'm great, I'm beautiful, I'm a perfect person. And through the mouth filter of new age, you know, masturbatory bullshit, that all paints a pretty picture. It fits into the quotes and the paradigms of, you know, the pictures of a sunset with a quote by whichever, you know, choose your flavor of commercialized, you know, yogi or mindfulness teacher, and slap that bitch on there. And, you know, it fits into all that real well. But in totally. Authenticity and truth, you know, what's happening is you're sort of hitting this dead end where it's an indulgence of the self. But, you know, fortunately, you know, what that can be
like a jumping off point, right? It's sort of a marker in the road for a lot of people.
Right. It's an overcorrection is what it is. And so people don't see it as that. It's like if you're riding a bicycle and you start to fall, you have to yank the handlebars in order to gain your balance. But if you yank them while you were riding in normal balance, you would wipe out. And so we've got to go too far to then be able to come back to find the natural center point. And I feel like that step is missing because that's not the pretty aspect of it. It's not not gratifying. It's not romantic. It's not seductive to come to find that white hot of truth about the self. And so I went through awful internal shit and war after my experience fighting with all that because, you know, as I said at the beginning of this, my deepest and most sincere interest is truth and being honest with myself, with others, and having an earnest and no bullshit approach to my own understanding of me in the world. And so and that's just an intuitive thing, you know, that's just kind of like what's baked in the fibers of who I am. And so in that process, you know, it's like, okay, great. Here's a whole bunch of bullshit that I thought I had dealt with and it's time to deal with it, you know, and that affects your friends and your relationships and your family and all that type of stuff. In the end, you know, for me in that experience, and I could talk about, you know, during my ceremonies, I was shown the source of the universe, which is an infinite river of neon mandalas. I went through a bunch of tubes and was visited by the gods of the eagle community who told me that I was a god, you know, and also an eagle, kind of like an Egyptian pharaoh, golden eagle thing. And I looked into someone else's consciousness and went through the conduits of their mind and saw traumas from 10, 15 years ago of a person who I didn't know that well. And later I talked to them about that and they confirmed that they had those experiences. You know, I looked at friends I knew like Aubrey or Mitch and or Dan Engel that were all in ceremony and saw like Polaroids being thrown down of their life as children and other moments, and talked to them afterwards. And they said, how did you know I was wearing that shirt or whatever on that day when that thing happened? But, you know, I look at all that as information. You know, it's like, because even and they'll show you how stringent my philosophy is that even in an experience which is transcendent, we're still categorizing and abstracting that experience through our nervous system. And we're creating the symbology of what our mind is abstracting and reading from universe, no matter what frequency it is, if it's meat space or if it's some type of, you know, other layer of the multiverse, we're still categorizing that information internally with our brains, with our nervous systems and our own it's flowing and being filtered through our own psychology. So to me, to look at those experiences as objective truths is an error. And I look at them as simply information, you know. So it's a matter of, the postmodern philosophical viewpoint of I believe and don't believe everything simultaneously, because I understand that my reality is simply shades of perception. And so, that's where a lot of people get lost as well. And then the further development of the ego from there, and a hierarchy is created. I say destroy hierarchy. The hierarchy only creates problems, and especially in the internal work. Because someone will go, oh, I have the truth now. I've got a secret, everyone, and they'll have this.
Right.
So I could.
I'm the one. I'm special.
It's like, well, we're all the one. We're all the one, fucker.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it seems like this thing that everyone kind of goes through as your consciousness, as you awaken and have, more realization about your place in the universe. And of course, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, but you're sort of on this path of, oh, wow, I'm understanding more, as you mentioned, you're all about finding the truth, and you're finding truths along the way. So there's more truth in your backpack than there was maybe 10 years ago. And so it's, I've heard it referred to as like spiritual narcissism. You got to be so careful when you start realizing, hold on, I'm one with all that is, and I'm, all these things, it is a very slippery slope where all of a sudden now you're creating more separation, and I'm the chosen one. I'm all those things. And, of course, thankfully the universe is very good at, it is no respecter of men, right? And everyone gets humbled. So I think, that is, it seems to be sort of a common theme, with a lot of people on this similar path.
Totally.
Have to kind of go through and be humbled and understand you're everything and nothing all at once.
Right.
Like you couldn't be, nothing matters, everything counts kind of thing.
Right. We are content within the universe, not the other way around. Like our being, our human consciousness and life is a symptom of the existence of the cosmos. People often think that they're the sun and the center of all things. And it makes sense because your consciousness is broadcasting from your head, your positive head. Ding. And, so you think that you're the center point, but really we're all a part of the same thing, as you were saying. And it's, I love the, if people like that topic or sniffing around themselves, catching some whiffs of potentialities while we're talking about this, a great book is, you mentioned spiritual narcissism, but Chogyam Trungpa has the book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. That's a great one where he addresses in his usual beautiful way those things. And that's like, I give lectures. I have a meditation course, and I've, as I said, studied and practiced meditation for a very long time. And I give lectures and talks on consciousness, and I kind of call it my fucked cosmic philosophy. And one of the things I typically do to start those is show how we're distracted by the idea that mindfulness and any of this stuff we're talking about, the development of the internal self, so much of it is such irrelevant, skin deep nonsense. It's all self-identification and really missing the point of the core of mindful thinking. And the core of it is where you are, the intention from where you're living is coming from. Not what you look like, not if you're wearing $100 yoga pants or Shipibo patterned shirt or something like that,
Right.
And so I'll typically, I'll start those lectures or those talks or something with a joke, one of which I've used as being like, okay, so everyone here is hungover and just had a couple of cups of coffee, right? Because that's I did, So, but it's like, it's a good way to disarm and show people like, hey, I'm just we're all people talking about our experiences, and none of us have any answers, and that's all there is,
Yeah, it brings you down to earth very quickly.
Totally.
Yeah, and another big piece on this journey of self-discovery and desire to be as genuine and as possible and uncover truth is, and something you mentioned, it kind of made me think of my experiences with ayahuasca. I've done 5 different kind of ceremonies with the same individual, guy named Pablo Miller, and actually did an interview with him very early on. Really, really good. But he talked, some of the things that you talked about really reminded me of sort of my experiences with him. And that is moving during my ayahuasca journeys, moving from the head into the heart when fear would sort of arise. And one of the things that he would talk about when you'd have these overwhelming and integration afterwards, as your fears or things are coming up that you need to work through, you talked about pulling over on the side of the road. And I was thinking that was like what he would say, like literally if you're driving, pull over on the side of the road, throw some, blinders on or whatever, I don't know what you call those things that people sleep with, and sit there and listen to some music and like deal with it, go within. And, so it seems like another big piece. You've got on one hand sort of the ego thing that arises with a lot of people on this journey, and then the other for me has been a big one is releasing like fears that are sort of holding me back, and that's been a lot of my journeys is wanting to have sort of going into ayahuasca with wanting, the things you're describing, it's like, those sound like, for me, ego-wise, those sound like fun and adventurous and all those things. In reality, it's like, okay, there's fears that are, and fears that are really not, what are they based on? Why are these things even there? They're kind of like silly on one hand, And so I was kind of looking through some of your different shows, and it looks like you've talked a bit about that, releasing fear. I'd be very curious to hear. I didn't get to hear that particular episode, but I'd be curious to hear what is your sort of thoughts as someone is dealing with fears that come up. And of course, this is something that plagues most people, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that you're moving from in your experience, talking about moving from your intellectual mind into the heart mind and feeling fear. Mm-hmm. It's, the essentially, would be you getting closer to allowing yourself into things that just like what I was talking about earlier, things intuitively, but that you haven't dealt with for whatever reason. And that's fear, because when you move from the mind to the heart, you're dealing with truth, and truth is fucking scary for most people, man, because it makes you acknowledge things about yourself, about your ego, and, about the story about who you are that you're projecting out into the world, And so, it can be hard to deal with, but, I would say that like I've looked at it this way for as long as I can remember, and I don't even know where it came from, but I thought you die at the end of this, right? Mm-hmm. So what is there to fear? Like, we're going.
No one's getting out alive.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, the only thing that like I approach those internal fears or uncomfortable things with as much truth as I can and with love. Because if you speak from the heart mind, even to yourself, if you listen to yourself, all you have to do is listen in any of this stuff. All you have to do is quiet your mind and listen to yourself, and you can access truth. And the fear is essentially like, it's like running. Like nothing is easy. Like I ran 4 miles right before we started this podcast, and there was times where I was getting tired, but it's like, why am I running? It's because I want to feel good later. Well, the running right now, where my knees are hurting and I'm getting winded and it's hot outside, that sucks. But I'm not doing that for that feeling. I'm doing it for later. And that's just like what experiencing fear and moving through fear to get to honesty and love is. This is like not everything in life. We tend to think that everything must be this pleasant, rosy, kind of almost hedonistic type of affair. But it's like, no, keeping in mind that opening your heart and grounding yourself and moving into those fears with love and patience, knowing that you'll move through them into a deeper sense of self-awareness and love is a powerful way to look at it. Because it'll suck. Yeah. It'll suck, but you're sweating out your fear through that process. And and it's just on the road to truth, on the road to, like I was talking about earlier, feeling good, feeling healthy is work. And it's just, that's part of the work is moving through that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer that those fears are sort of gatekeepers to, it's like, I'll often say it's like a lump of coal until you deal with it and process it. Then it becomes sort of the diamond, right? On the other side of that fear is the gift. And when you can, for me, that helps to fuel my, I guess, courage to deal with the things that I've put off or I don't want to look at, or, it's like, okay, that's actually a gift in disguise. Don't be fooled. Right.
Yeah.
And that has empowered me personally to sort of face some of this stuff.
Yeah. And, the other thing is that like we're not all meant to go spelunking into infinity. Some people like we need to find, that's just my trip, and perhaps your trip, like, but people, especially in my meditation course, like hundreds of people, take my course. And one of the things I hear a lot is people feeling like kind of disappointed, self-flagellation for being like, oh, I couldn't get this thought or this thing's holding me back. And it's like, yeah, man, that's just a part of our experience. There will never be a clean, you're never going to be a cooked goose, you're never going to be this clean, empty vessel. It's just all part of the process. Like this thing is a constant unfolding of you. It's a blossoming that happens over and over and over. However, the upside to it is that, as you confront that first round of shit that's inside of yourself, it gets, those roadways can kind of clear open. So then the more you learn to be honest with yourself and deal with truth, the easier it becomes and the more you clear out. And then as you go through life, as more nasty shit comes your way, which it always will. Like, our consciousness, our being is a river, and there'll always be good things and bad things flowing in it. And we'll always get hung up sometimes. But it's all about how you deal with that. And so the more command you get at dealing with those things, the easier it becomes to move instinctually and as your reactive response towards those fears or those problems with truth and love and compassion for others and for the self.
Yeah, it's such a big piece for people. How many people out there are so quick to judge themselves and beat themselves up for where they are and where they're not, and hold themselves in comparison to someone else and where they're at in their own journey. It's like, this is truly is a journey of self-discovery. You're sort of in this alone, and if you can stop putting yourself up against someone else and where they're at in their own journey or what you have or haven't done, it seems to be the biggest obstacle for most people. They're just so hard on self-deprecating and so hard on themselves. And it's like, yeah, like you said, it's a constant unfolding. You're never going to get it done. You're going to continue, this thing goes on and on and on. Every time you hit a new plateau, you're going to realize there's a whole vista that opens up in front of you, and you have just as far to go as you ever did.
Right.
And it's infinite. It's eternal. So just kind of relax into being perfectly imperfect.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting this podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on the show Missing Links, the incredible researcher Greg Braden explores all the biggest questions concerning who we are, where we come from, where we're going, by connecting the missing links between science and spirituality to complete our understanding of humanity's history and to better understand the interconnectedness of all things. Awesome, right? And that's just one example. As you guys constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. Man, so many interesting things that I could bring up to talk to you about. One thing that I love, one thing that I noticed on your show that as I was kind of skimming through and didn't have time to listen to them all, but they all seemed so interesting and of course took bits and pieces. There was one where you talked about hearing a repeated sentence in a dream. And I find, of course, the dream state so fascinating. And so I was like, okay, I'm not even going to go there. I'm just going to ask him, what is the repeated sentence in the dream? Tell us a little bit about that.
The backstory on it was, I experience this thing, kind of a phenomenon every once in a while where I will be dreaming and as I am waking up, I'm conscious of the threshold of my mind or, moving through the threshold from sleeping to waking consciousness. But my witness mind is observing that transaction of my own mind waking to this reality. And perhaps it's because I've made the joke so many times about I believe Suzuki saying that enlightenment is very easy. You do it every night, while you're sleeping. The trick is just doing it while you're awake. Maybe it's my punishment for making that joke so many times. But I'll have that experience every once in a while, and I love it. It's a very fascinating, interesting thing to sort of observe your move from dream world into waking consciousness. So this particular occasion, I was dreaming of this voice saying, remember to see the divinity. It was going, remember to see the divinity in all things, in all people, in yourself, in all situations, in all aspects.
Yeah.
Remember to see the divinity. And it just kept repeating that over and over and over.
Wow.
And that was what I woke up to, was that sound on loop. It was kind of dreaming that, and it came up and I continued to hear it in my waking reality, which is common for me, given that my background in audio and sound. I have a sort of if there's an if there was a they say you have a kind of a picture memory. What was it? What was that term?
synesthesia.
Well, not synesthesia, but having where whatever you see, you can remember seeing that thing,
right. Photographic memory?
There we go, photographic memory. I think I sort of have like an autographic memory. That makes sense. So I hear, sounds, like I hear songs and, harmonic structures and production qualities. Yeah. So I think in life, I experience some, facets of that for sure. And so in dreams, you're hearing these sentences, these sayings and things, and continuing to wake up and hear it as well. So that was a pretty trippy one. It was great. So, and a good reminder to hit that.
Yeah, I think that's the most profound reminder, really, and it's something that I'll talk about a lot on the show. Is like, if there's so many mundane moments in our, we call them mundane, and it's because we're not bringing that awareness to the moment. And it's like, this moment is divine, actually. And not only is it divine, it's as divine as any other moment that ever has been or will be. And if you take that sort of concept and play with it in any given, mundane moment especially, it becomes a really interesting sort of exercise to say, okay, this is I'm doing this very mundane thing, but hold on I'm going to play with the idea that this is the most divine moment that's ever been, equal to all others. Okay, now I'm going to look for the divinity in the moment. And when you start doing that, it starts taking on a whole different quality, and things sort of start, like you're talking about with, audio, like really popping out, right? Or being an audiophile, a hi-fi enthusiast. It's like, that's what sort of starts happening with your reality. And, I love to talk about it because I'm not the best at it all the time. And it's like a reminder, dude, this moment is divine. This moment right here, this is as divine as any other moment. So now, how does that make you, as far as all our sort of struggles or we've got all these goals and things we need to achieve? It's like, well, you're not going to achieve anything that's more magical than what's already happening. So sort of relax into these divine moments and know that they're unending, and thank goodness they change so that we don't get bored out of our minds. But to me, that's like a very profound sentence to hear, and one to definitely take to heart.
For sure. And I'm changing my bio now to hi-fi reality enthusiasts.
I love it. That's so good.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that's like my meditation course is called Release Into Now for that very reason. Is it's all about, we have this idea that, we have to acquire something, we have to grasp something in order to gain some understanding of the self and the nature of our reality. But it's quite the opposite. It's all letting go and allowing yourself to observe that moment from that perspective as continuously as possible. And the more you do it, the more that awareness grows into you. Even whenever I'm having my shittiest day, I in my witness mind is still very aware of like, this is the compost that's as equally beautiful and relevant as the flower, but my monkey mind, and for various reasons in that has,
I like that.
Has it programmed that is distasteful, but really it's more of the same. And I also see the humor in it. Yeah. It's not like I'm, walking around with a straight back, in a soft voice, like masturbating over my own ability to perceive negative situations in a positive light. That's bullshit. I'm just thinking like, this fucking sucks. And, but it's just part of the equation, and so later it won't suck. And, let's not get too wrapped up and caught up and turn this ember into a blaze or anything,
Yeah, you don't have to be happy about everything. I think that's a big, sort of misconception. It's like unhappiness is a part of the ride. I like to say rather be at peace with what you're dealing with. Like, hey, I'm at peace with this. This sucks. I don't like it. I don't love it, but I'm at peace with the compost. And I realize I got to have the shit on my shoes sometimes in order for, the flower to grow, right?
Exactly. It's all breathing in and breathing out, like, and not just in the body, but I mean, absolutely. Reality and like the dynamics of our human experience. It's just this, this expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction,
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it's an interesting sort of concept. I've heard it said, who knows if it's the case or not, but it definitely sort of, it makes a lot of sense to me when you start looking at, okay, it's a fractal universe, right? We're sort of chips off the block. And you can see, of course, looking at, atoms and how they sort of mirror what's happening in the solar system and so forth. And, I've heard it said, what you just said made me think of it is sort of the breathing in and breathing out of source or higher selves or whatever. It's like, and it being, the idea that the universe started as this infinitesimal, speck that has exploded outwards. And one of the theories is that one day it'll collapse back upon itself, right? The breathing in and breathing out of source, in a sense, like it's expansion, contraction, contraction. So I think that's an interesting, when you talk about, the universe being a mirror of sort of what's happening on a, consciousness level, it's an interesting, it gets very interesting.
I would say, exactly. It's like, and even our lives, that was the reason why I began eating meat again after the ceremonies, was because even, what you identify as Brandon, whenever that thing is born and you go through your entire life, which to you seems very important, and it is important, but it has all of this nuance and relevance and this whole linear story that your brain has created. And then after you drop your body, which is the way I like that saying for death.
It's good.
Not to suggest that there's some Hallmark card waiting on the other side, but I do tend to look at people as like, these vibrations of awareness that's wearing a meat tuxedo or something. So, after you do that, it's like, that's the exhale, and then there'll be another person that's born, and that's the inhale. And it's not you. It has none of your personality or preference or your identity or ego, but it's just, another breath in, another breath out, and continuous for all things in infinity. And I think that I think it's the Alan Watts thing where he talks about the tree growing an apple, and then the tree growing another apple, and then that apple falls and rots into the ground, and then another apple is grown off that tree, and then that apple falls and rots, and it's like it's just appling, but it's not the same apple, but it's still appling, and that's what the universe is doing. As he quotes it so beautifully, he says it's peopling. And so that's all part of the process and the cycle of being. And that's why I started eating meat again, was because I realized that I had stopped because of all of the obvious answers of the idea of life and not wanting to consume it, and obviously the industrial farming practices are pretty abhorrent. But I realized that one, I'd sort of been holding on. It had been 7 years. I'd been sort of holding on to this idea, this identity. I realized it was in some forms a self-identification. I was like, I started it with good intention, and with kind of involuntarily, where it's actually just the more I intellectualized the idea of eating meat, it started kind of grossing me out. And
exactly what my sort of journey has been, and even recently I have eaten a little bit again. Like, I just went to Burning Man Festival. Food's hard to come by out there, and then just had an interview with this same individual I mentioned, Mike Bledsoe, and he was talking about it. He's like, same kind of path as you, going from not eating to eating it, and realizing, like, okay, industrialized farming is one thing, knowing how it's been, sustainably farmed and so forth is a whole nother thing. And at the end of the day, it's such a personal journey, what feels, and I think with all this stuff, there's so much, a sea of noise out there, pros and cons of all these things. And at the end of it, it's like, it's such a personal sort of decision. It's like, you need to really listen to your own intuition. And I think that's the ultimate guide for all of us, because we can be lost in all the information that's out there now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's like, with anything, it's like, just listen to your intuition and go off that, but to me, I think I just saw it all as this cyclical nature of life and reality, and it became in the same way that I really released myself into that same structure I was describing of the kind of breathing in and breathing out. It's like there's a momentary glimpse of Cory Allenness in the universe, but that'll go away, and then the shock wave of being will continue. I looked at meat in the same way, and whenever I experienced in my own mind anyway, plants having consciousness from the ceremonies, I thought, well, then what? Then I'm going to eat air. Well, what's who's to say that air doesn't have a consciousness?
Man, get with it. It's the new thing.
I just want to pull those people's man buns so hard. And it's like, okay, well, if plants have a consciousness, that it just took a entheogenic experience for me to be able to observe and define the paradigm of their consciousness from my human perspective, and animals and so forth, and my conscious, it's all this big churning system, and life sustains life. It's folding into itself. And to me, I realized that a part of that was putting some of it in your mouth.
Right. Very, very interesting perspective. So one question that I have a couple, like I always ask everyone, there's like a few questions. And one of them is, I love stories of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal sort of stories. I mean, although if a demon chased you or something, you want to share that, by all means, Cory.
I mean, I had one crawl out of my chest, but I slapped him on the ass and told him to beat feet,
Way to handle that. So I'd love to hear any kind of magical story you got for us.
Sure. Yeah. Since we're talking about, ceremonies and stuff like that, one of the kind of best and funniest stories that people enjoy, I enjoy, and is whenever I was going down there, we went down there and we were in the ayahuasca kitchen. In the shaman Don Robert was brewing up the brew. We were all hanging around, and one of the being a part of the brewing was important to them, and so we all were given various leaves, and some were given a little dash of Toei, which was put in there. And if anyone's trying to brew their own for any reason, and they go, "Oh, they use Toei," like, my God, don't.
What is Toei? I don't know what Toei is.
It's a leaf that is extraordinarily powerful and psychoactive, and also it's toxic to some degree. If you have more than a little, it's gonna be a fucking nightmare, and also verging on the edge of psychosis. So whenever people go to
this is like an addition to their ayahuasca brew. This is like, let's step it up kind of thing. Oh, wow.
Well, yes, but the important thing that I was stressing was that what happens is that people go to Peru, they go to Iquitos, and they just find some guy, and I'm a shaman, and what will often happen is someone will brew up, a Toei heavy batch of ayahuasca, and that's the people that become incapacitated, have terrible nightmares, and experience which lasts forever, and then they get molested or whatever. It's basically like a flash bomb that is used. However, so in this brew, the person Don Robert is a Banco shaman of 3 or 4 generations. I mean, he's really one of the highest revered masters in the Amazon. So, in his brew, he uses basically like 1 Toei leaf for, I can't remember. It was like a garbage bag full of whatever the other MOI inhibiting leaves were. So, it's like this, it's like scotch making or whiskey making or something.
Right.
Or beer making. It's this specific detailed craft and recipe. Anyway, so they passed out various plants and pieces of vine or whatever, anything that's going to be thrown into the bubbling pot, and what you're meant to do is set your intention, which is important, and so you take whatever they gave you, go up to the bubbling pot and set your intention, and then throw that plant matter into the bubbling pot. So whenever it was my turn, I went up there and had my little leaves or whatever I had. This moment actually is caught in the ayahuasca documentary that Aubrey just released. There's a
really?
a moment of me standing there making my intention. And so,
what is the documentary? I got to check this out.
It's just called ayahuasca, and I think it's drinkthejungle.com is where you can go check it out. And
Dreams of the Jungle?
No, Drink the Jungle.
Drink the Jungle.
And
okay,
me and Mitch and Amber and Dan Engel and Aubrey are all in it, and his sister and a couple other random people that were just there. And you can see Don Howard and Don Robert are there doing their thing. You can see me in an infrared camera shot mid ceremony swirling around in infinity. So anyway, whenever I went to put this in, I put the plant matter into the pot, I heard a voice in my head, and it was very bizarre. It was like a psychic connection between the brew and my mind. And, as I think I've made clear up until this point, I am not one for bullshit or for embellishing of any type of experience. I simply,
you definitely portrayed that,
right? Yeah, because to me, obviously, it's a diversion of the path of truth. I'm not interested in that shit. So, in my ear's eye, or my mind's ear, whatever you want to call it, as I was setting this intention, I put as I was putting the leaves in there, this voice, it sounded like Marcellus Wallace from Pulp Fiction. You remember him?
Oh man, yeah. Of course.
He goes, "We bad motherfucker. Oh, we're gonna do this shit smooth like." And I was like, "What?"
You've already kind of got that voice. And
I know. Yeah. Maybe it was some deep, root of my brainstem talking to myself. Yeah. But I love that one. And, actually people use that as sort of a safe.
That's so good.
People use that saying, I told that story after it happened, and everyone that was there was laughing, and you're just kind of enjoying how silly it was. And so, subsequently in the ceremonies, people were coming up to me and saying, "Hey man, what's funny is that in the rough times of my ceremony, I actually that was like my mantra, as I was thinking like,
that's
we're
so
going to
good.
do this smooth. This is going to be smooth."
It's so good. Oh man. Yeah. So I'll definitely have to check that out. Dan, I actually had Dan on the show a while back with, Martin Palenko and Dean Adamson. I don't know if you know them as well, but,
I don't.
Oh yeah. Very, very interesting group. Yeah. It was the 3 of them. And, they of course are doing all the iboga stuff in Mexico.
Oh, right. Yeah. Dan and I have known each other for years and are friends, and we knew each other back whenever both of us had hair.
Back in the hair years.
Back in the hair years, man.
Back in the hair years. Oh man, Cory, you're awesome. This has been like such a. I feel like I could like pick your brain for another 3 hours, but I know you have a life to get to, and so do I outside of this. But I would like to ask, okay, so what's the best way for people to connect with you? Obviously on the show, Astral Hustle, and anything else like that you want to share? Anything exciting in the works, or anything you want to leave the people with?
Sure. Yeah. If you go to my site, cory-allen.com, all the resources are there. You can, one of the things I've made in the last year or so that people have really enjoyed have been a series of binaural beats. And there are a lot of those out there, but given my background in audio production and being a composer, and also the interest in the, in the mind and the internal self. And I actually have been kind of studying frequencies and responses towards the mind for well over a decade, just for interest in my own composition. So I made a couple of volumes of binaural beats, which Aubrey and I released together, and cool. Those are on his website, and also you can get them through my website. Those have been incredibly successful and popular, and the amount of hundreds and hundreds of messages I've got from people it's just a beautiful thing to be able to put that out into the world.
Also, can you explain a little bit about binaural beats for those who aren't that familiar?
Sure. It's basically a sound technology which you can use to entrain your brainwave states. So you play, it's one frequency in one ear, one frequency in the other ear that have a slight vibrational difference, and the dominant brainwave state in your mind, alpha, beta, theta, gamma, etc., tries to make up the difference and then syncs with the difference between those two tones in your ears. So, you'll always have sympathetic brainwave states and dominant ones. So the idea here is to entrain the brain into a particular state. So there are plenty for meditation. I use them underneath my guided meditations to help you get into a lower, state of vibration of consciousness. And also for focus, the second volume is called the Flow Pack. They're all intended to keep you in a state of attentive awareness. And mine are unique in that I use actually, a dozen pairs of frequencies simultaneously, all weaving in and out of each other in extremely subtle ways that probably to the ear, the casual listener would not be able to discern. Also pulses of white noise and all this other thing. But it's there's this linear progression which is painted across the length of these 30-minute tracks to really take you on this journey and unfold your mind in the best, in what I see the best way. And so those are there. You can also, on my site, you can see Release Into Now, which you can go to that website as well. ReleaseIntoNow.com is my meditation course. It's a 6-week meditation course. And I take basically everything I learned over the years of my own study with meditation. I don't like different schools of thought in general, much less in a meditation. I feel like the thing that's best is what works for you. And so I took pieces of different schools of thought, removed what I thought what was most interesting, and added my own self-discoveries and perspective into that, and built a 6-week course, which we'll be enrolling for again, and very soon, maybe next week or so. So there's that, and then of course my music. I have probably about a dozen albums. If you have vinyl, a lot of beautiful.
Is that all?
Beautiful, delicious vinyl you can see on my site. The music's there. It's all conceptual and lush, beautiful, and rather psychedelic. And
beautiful.
Then of the Astral Hustle, that's the podcast, and we always have a good time stretching our little monkey minds on that show.
You're definitely got the Astral Hustle down. Like, you got a lot of things going on there, all of which sound supremely interesting. So I definitely want to check out this binaural beat stuff. I want to check it all out. So, and I'm sure some of the listeners will as well. So, yeah, Cory, this has been quite the epic adventure, picking your brain. I'd love to do it again sometime. And I will leave you with one question that I always leave off with. In 60 seconds or less, what's the meaning of life according to Cory Allen?
Oh, the meaning of life is very simple. It's just life. You know, our being is the purpose for being. And that's all there is to it. You know, it's like it's not more complex than that. We just in the act of our own existence is where we find meaning. Yeah,
I love it. You're creating the meaning. Thank you so much, Cory. You are an epic soul, my friend, and I look forward to our paths crossing at some point again in the near future. I'm sure we will. Until then, journey well.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, man, and I will talk to you again soon.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.